In the soft margins of every great story, there exists someone who sees what others dismiss, believes what others mock, and loves without requiring the world to love them back. And tonight, you are about to meet her. You settle into stillness, allowing the weight of the day to slide from your shoulders like water from stone, and you let your imagination carry you to a world where magic hides in plain sight, and where one peculiar girl with protuberant silvery eyes dared to look at reality sideways. Luna Lovegood never asked to become a symbol of quiet resilience, much like how the radishes she wore as earrings never asked to become fashion statements. Yet here we are, centuries of vegetable-based accessory discourse later, and the world still cannot quite figure out what to do with people who refuse to fit neatly into prescribed boxes. You find yourself drawn to her story because somewhere deep within your own experience, you recognize the particular ache of being misunderstood, of holding beliefs that others find strange, of walking through crowded spaces feeling wonderfully and terribly alone. The year is 1981, and in a small village called Ottery St. Catchpole in Devon, England, a baby girl enters the world at precisely the wrong historical moment, just as the wizarding community celebrates the apparent defeat of the darkest wizard of the age. A family welcomes a daughter who will one day stand among heroes, though nobody bothers to mention this in the history books, because historians, magical or otherwise, have always had a talent for overlooking the people who matter most, which scholars continue to debate when examining the selective nature of historical memory. Much as the ancient Library of Alexandria, established around 283 BCE under Ptolemy II, preserved countless texts while countless others vanished into obscurity, the story of Luna Lovegood nearly slipped through history's careless fingers. There exists a lesser-known theory among magical historians that the Lovegood family descended from Celtic druids who communicated with creatures invisible to ordinary perception, which would certainly explain a great deal about Luna's particular gifts, though admittedly it would also explain very little, because family origin stories have a delightful tendency to explain everything and nothing simultaneously. You breathe in slowly, allowing the quietness of this beginning to wash over you, preparing yourself for a journey that will take you through loss and wonder, friendship and war, and ultimately to the peaceful certainty that being different was never Luna's flaw, but rather her most magnificent offering to a world desperately in need of new ways of seeing. You step closer now into the early years of Luna's existence, where sunshine pours through the windows of a rook-shaped house perched improbably on a hillside, and you find yourself watching a small girl with dirty blonde hair and an expression of perpetual curiosity that adults frequently mistake for confusion, though honestly, the confusion usually belongs to the adults struggling to keep up with her observations. Pandora Lovegood, Luna's mother, moves through these memories like light through crystal. A brilliant experimental witch whose passion for magical innovation both inspired her daughter and ultimately shattered the family in ways that could never be fully repaired. You see little Luna trailing behind her mother in a cluttered workshop, asking questions about nargles before she could properly pronounce the word, receiving answers that other parents might have dismissed as nonsense, but that Pandora delivered with complete sincerity, because in the Lovegood household, imagination was never something to be outgrown. It was something to be cultivated like the strangest and most beautiful garden. The dynamic between mother and daughter reminds you of how Marie Curie, who won Nobel Prizes in both physics and chemistry in the early 20th century, instilled in her own daughters a fearless approach to scientific inquiry, though Marie presumably used fewer references to crumple-horned snorkaks during their lessons, which seems like a missed opportunity if we're being completely honest about pedagogical innovation. There exists a peculiar footnote in magical scholarship suggesting that the spell Pandora was developing when tragedy struck may have been related to ancient Babylonian enchantments designed to pierce the veil between visible and invisible realms, a detail that remains hotly contested among those who study experimental charms, with some researchers arguing that her work represented a breakthrough that the magical establishment preferred to suppress. You watch the sunlight catch Pandora's hair as she laughs at something Luna has said, neither of them knowing that these golden afternoons are numbered, that this happiness exists on borrowed time, and you feel the particular weight of witnessing joy that will soon be followed by sorrow. Luna will later describe herself as someone who believes in things others find absurd, but you begin to understand that this belief was not born from naivety. It was handed down like an heirloom from a mother who refused to accept conventional limitations on what could be real. The scholarly community continues to debate whether grief fundamentally reshapes personality or merely amplifies traits already present, and in Luna's case, you suspect the answer lies somewhere in the complicated middle where most true answers tend to hide. You move forward now through the delicate fabric of time, arriving at a morning that will fracture Luna's world into before and after, and you do so with the gentle understanding that some sections of stories are hard to tell but necessary to witness because they explain everything that follows. The year is 1990, and 9-year-old Luna Lovegood stands in the doorway of her mother's workshop, watching with the particular stillness of a child who does not yet understand what she is seeing, but somehow knows that the universe has shifted on its axis. Pandora Lovegood lies motionless among the debris of her latest experiment, surrounded by the scattered remnants of a spell gone terribly wrong. And the silence that fills the room is the kind of silence that never fully lifts, that echoes through every subsequent moment like a bell that refuses to stop ringing even after the sound has technically ended. You breathe with Luna as she processes the unprocessable, as the terrible mathematics of death begins its slow and grinding work upon her understanding, and you feel the peculiar injustice of a brilliant woman taken by the very curiosity that made her extraordinary. Because the universe, as it turns out, has a rather dark sense of humor about punishing people for reaching too far, which seems unnecessarily dramatic even for the universe. Xenophilius Lovegood, Luna's father, will later write extensively about the experimental spell that claimed his wife's life. His articles in the Quibbler mixing genuine grief with increasingly elaborate theories about invisible forces and hidden truths. And you understand that his eccentricity was perhaps always a form of armor worn over a wound that refused to heal. The historical parallel that surfaces in your mind is the death of William the Conqueror in 1087, not because the circumstances share anything in common, but because both deaths reshaped the worlds they left behind in ways that took decades to fully manifest. And also because William allegedly died from injuries sustained when his horse stumbled over burning embers, which proves that even historically significant deaths can be somewhat undignified, a fact that offers strange comfort when considering the randomness of mortality. There exists a theory, mentioned only in the most speculative corners of magical academia, that Pandora's soul did not fully depart at the moment of her death, but instead fractured, with pieces remaining attached to the creatures she had spent her life studying, creatures that conventional wizarding society insisted did not exist, which would make their role in preserving her essence particularly ironic. The debate among magical scholars regarding the nature of consciousness after death has never been resolved, partly because the evidence remains frustratingly anecdotal, and partly because the researchers who get too close to answers have a troubling tendency to stop publishing altogether, though whether this reflects genuine discovery or simply excellent retirement planning remains unclear. You watch Luna kneel beside her mother's body, not crying yet because the tears have not found their way to the surface. And you understand that this moment will teach her something that most people spend entire lifetimes avoiding. That death is not an enemy to be feared, but a doorway to be acknowledged. That the people we lose do not truly leave us, but merely step into a room we cannot yet enter. The weeks that follow blur together in your perception, as they must have blurred for Luna herself, a haze of condolences and casseroles and adults speaking in hushed voices, treating her with the particular awkwardness that adults reserve for grieving children whom they desperately want to help, but do not know how to reach. Xenophilius copes by throwing himself into his work with renewed fervor, printing issue after issue of the Quibbler filled with increasingly elaborate investigations, and you see Luna sitting cross-legged on the floor of the printing room, watching the pages emerge and understanding instinctively that her father's obsession with hidden truths is really an obsession with finding some explanation, any explanation, for why the world can be so randomly cruel. The villagers of Ottery Saint, Catchpole begin avoiding the Lovegood house, with the polite determination of people who do not wish to catch whatever strange affliction seems to have settled over its inhabitants. And Luna notices this avoidance with the clear-eyed perception of a child who has already learned that adults frequently lack the courage to be honest about their discomfort. You find yourself admiring the quiet strength that begins to crystallize within her during these difficult months. A strength that does not announce itself with dramatic gestures, but simply exists, steady and unshakable, like a small flame that refuses to be extinguished, no matter how hard the wind blows. She begins wearing her mother's belongings, a bracelet made of butterbeer corks, a necklace strung with strange objects, and when other children laugh at her appearance, she responds with a serenity that confuses them because they expect tears or anger, not genuine unconcern. The butterbeer cork necklace becomes legendary among those who will later know Luna, a symbol of her refusal to perform normalcy for the comfort of others, and you realize that this refusal began not as rebellion, but as fidelity. Fidelity to a mother who taught her that visible strangeness could be a form of invisible strength. Luna spends the years between her mother's death and her Hogwarts letter, reading every issue of the Quibbler cover to cover, helping her father hunt for evidence of creatures that professional magizoologists dismissed as fantasy, and developing an understanding of loneliness that would later become her greatest gift to others who felt alone. There is a particular kind of wisdom that emerges from early loss, a wisdom that sits uncomfortably alongside innocence and creates a strange hybrid consciousness capable of seeing the world with both wonder and resignation. And you watch this wisdom settle into Luna like sediment at the bottom of a clear pool, changing the composition of everything above it without disturbing the surface. The summer before her 11th birthday approaches with the inevitability of all summers, carrying with it the promise of Hogwarts and the terror of new beginnings. And you see Luna sitting at her bedroom window watching the sunset paint the hills of Devon in colors that her mother would have tried to capture in some experimental charm, some new form of beauty that conventional magic had never imagined. You accompany Luna now to the pivotal moment when an owl arrives at the rook-shaped house carrying a letter sealed with the Hogwarts crest, and you feel the mixture of excitement and trepidation that rises in her chest because beginning something new means leaving behind the familiar landscape of grief that has become, in its own strange way, almost comfortable. Xenophilius Lovegood reads the acceptance letter aloud at the breakfast table, with tears streaming down his face. Not because he doubted his daughter would be accepted, but because this moment should have been witnessed by two parents, and the absence of the second makes the joy feel incomplete, like a song missing its harmony. Luna pats her father's hand with the matter-of-fact compassion of a child who has become accustomed to managing adult emotions, which is both touching and slightly heartbreaking if you think about it too long, so perhaps it's better to focus instead on the shopping trip to Diagon Alley that follows. The cobblestone streets of magical London overwhelm Luna's senses in the best possible way, filling her vision with moving photographs and floating quills and stacked cauldrons and all manner of wonderful objects that seem designed specifically to make ordinary life feel insufficient, which is essentially the entire marketing strategy of Diagon Alley and has been since the 13th century when the street was first established. You walk beside Luna as she selects her wand. An unusual wood, an unusual core, a combination that the wand maker examines with raised eyebrows before carefully declining to comment on what such a combination might signify, which Luna finds encouraging rather than concerning because she has never been interested in signifying ordinary things. There exists an obscure historical record suggesting that the shop where the Lovegoods purchased Luna's school supplies once housed a different business entirely. A purveyor of spectacles enchanted to reveal invisible creatures, which closed abruptly in 1743 under circumstances that the magical authorities never satisfactorily explained, though conspiracy theorists have been explaining it ever since with varying degrees of plausibility. The robes Luna tries on fit perfectly, except that she immediately modifies them with her mother's old jewelry, transforming standard school attire into something that resembles what a very creative person might wear to their own coronation, if coronations were held in forests populated by imaginary creatures. Xenophilius beams with approval because he has spent Luna's entire life teaching her that conformity is a prison voluntarily entered by people too afraid to be free. And now he watches that teaching manifest in his daughter's casual disregard for conventional appearance standards. Truly a proud parenting moment, if unconventional ones count, which they absolutely should. The Hogwarts Express gleams scarlet in the September sunshine as Luna approaches it for the first time, pushing a cart containing her trunk, her father's latest issue of the Quibbler, and a peculiar certainty that she is about to enter a world where she will not belong. Not because there is anything wrong with her, but because belonging has never been particularly high on her list of priorities. Platform 9 3/4 bustles with families saying goodbye, mothers adjusting collars and fathers dispensing last-minute advice, and Luna observes these rituals with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a culture she has read about but never personally experienced. You notice how she kisses her father on the cheek with genuine warmth, how she promises to write about every blibbering humdinger she encounters, and how she boards the train without looking back, because she has learned that looking back makes leaving harder, and life is going to require a great deal of leaving, so she might as well begin practicing now. The compartments slide past her vision as she walks the train corridor, most of them already filled with clusters of friends reuniting after summer holidays, speaking in the exclusive shorthand of shared history that makes newcomers feel like intruders. And Luna does not take this personally because she understands that friendship is a language learned gradually rather than spoken fluently from the first day. Much as the ancient Roman poet Ovid was exiled from Rome in 8 CE, for reasons that historians still debate, forced to spend his remaining years among people who did not speak his language or share his references, Luna accepts her displacement with a philosophical calm that many adults never achieve. Though admittedly, her exile involves fewer Black Sea winters and more opportunities to study magical creatures, so the comparison only extends so far. She finds an empty compartment near the back of the train and settles in with the Quibbler held upside down, a reading technique she perfects for no reason other than that it amuses her, and watches the English countryside begin to slide past the window with the steady acceleration of a future approaching. The sorting hat, when it eventually sits upon her head, takes an unusually long time to make its decision, muttering to itself about unusual minds and peculiar courage, and the complications of placing someone who would genuinely thrive in any of the 4 houses, before finally announcing Ravenclaw with an air of uncertain hope, like a matchmaker who has done their best, but recognizes that some souls resist easy categorization. Luna takes her seat at the Ravenclaw table to polite applause and immediate whispers, her radish earrings catching the candlelight and her expression suggesting that she is thinking about something very far away from the great hall and the feast, and the curious stares of classmates who have already begun forming opinions about her oddity. The first weeks at Hogwarts confirm what Luna already suspected. She will not be popular, she will not be embraced, and she will spend a great deal of time in her own company, none of which bothers her nearly as much as it should, which in turn bothers her classmates who expect their rejection to produce visible suffering and feel somehow cheated when it doesn't. There is a scholarly debate, ongoing in both magical and Muggle psychology, regarding whether social isolation genuinely wounds individuals who claim not to feel wounded, or whether some people are simply wired differently regarding the need for belonging, and Luna's experience offers evidence for both positions without resolving the question definitively. You watch her explore the castle with quiet wonder, discovering hidden passages and forgotten classrooms and creatures that scurry into shadows when anyone else approaches but hold perfectly still for her, recognizing somehow that she means no harm, that she sees them as worthy of attention rather than extermination. You skip forward now through Luna's early Hogwarts years, watching the montage of loneliness that plays out in common rooms and corridors and classrooms, where her hand rises to answer questions that professors had not asked, where her observations land like stones in still water, creating ripples that other students find disturbing because they prefer their water undisturbed. The nickname Luna Lovegood attaches itself to her during her first week and never fully detaches, becoming so familiar that even Luna begins using it with the ironic affection of someone who has reclaimed an insult, transforming poison into something almost nutritious through sheer force of indifference. Her belongings vanish regularly, shoes hidden, books relocated, assignments mysteriously misplaced, and you feel a flare of protective anger on her behalf, before noticing that Luna herself approaches these thefts with genuine curiosity rather than distress, as though her classmates are presenting her with puzzles rather than cruelties. The stolen shoes become particularly legendary, appearing in increasingly implausible locations, and Luna develops a talent for walking barefoot through castle corridors that would impress anyone familiar with the temperature of Scottish stone in winter, which hovers somewhere between unpleasant and medically concerning. You recognize in her experience echoes of so many outsiders throughout history, people whose refusal to perform normalcy made them targets of the fearful and the insecure. And you understand that every generation produces its own versions of Luna, people who see too clearly and speak too honestly for comfort. The year is 1995, and a new school year brings changes that will reshape Luna's life entirely, beginning with a train compartment and a group of students who will actually listen to her rather than merely tolerating her presence while exchanging meaningful glances. You watch Luna settle into that fateful compartment on the Hogwarts Express, holding her copy of The Quibbler with calculated nonchalance, as though she has not specifically chosen this compartment because its occupants include the famous Harry Potter and his companions who might, just possibly, prove different from other students. Neville Longbottom she knows slightly, a fellow target of casual cruelty who has always nodded politely when passing in corridors, and this minimal acknowledgement has been enough to warm Luna's opinion of him considerably because her standards for basic decency have been calibrated by years of receiving very little. Harry Potter enters the compartment looking hunted and exhausted, bearing the weight of whatever summer horrors the newspapers have been alternately exposing and concealing, and Luna observes him with the frank interest of someone who has read extensively about his life in her father's publication and finds the living reality rather more complicated than the printed speculation. Ginny Weasley follows, then Neville, and the compartment fills with an awkwardness that Luna navigates by simply ignoring it, continuing to read her magazine upside down as though her new companions are not staring at her, with expressions ranging from confusion to carefully concealed amusement. The history of unlikely friendships includes famous examples like the correspondence between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, bitter political rivals who reconciled in old age and died on the same July 4th in 1826, proving that connection can emerge from the strangest circumstances. Though admittedly, Adams and Jefferson probably discussed fewer nargles than Luna introduces into conversation, which some would consider a significant improvement and others a notable loss. There exists a peculiar footnote in magical history regarding the Hogwarts Express itself, which allegedly contains several compartments that exist in temporal loops, replaying meaningful moments for travelers who need to witness them again. Though the train's maintenance records dismiss this as operational irregularity, rather than anything deliberately enchanted. Luna offers information about Thestrals with the casual certainty of someone stating obvious facts, not realizing until the shocked silence that most of her companions cannot see the skeletal horses drawing the carriages, that this ability marks her as someone who has witnessed death, and that sharing this detail so openly might be considered oversharing by the standards of normal social interaction. The awkwardness deepens before it resolves, as Harry realizes that Luna is not mocking him but genuinely understands something that others cannot, and you watch the first fragile threads of real connection begin to weave between outsiders who recognize each other's exile. The journey to Hogwarts passes with conversation that starts stilted and gradually loosens, Luna offering observations that draw genuine laughs rather than mocking ones, and you sense that something has shifted in her experience, that these people might actually see her, rather than looking through her to the version of normal they wish she would become. Hermione Granger, upon meeting Luna later, will struggle with the challenge of respecting someone whose beliefs contradict everything Hermione values about evidence-based reasoning, and this tension creates its own kind of comedy, watching the most prepared student in Hogwarts history confront someone for whom preparation and evidence operate in entirely different frameworks. The debate among educators regarding different types of intelligence, whether emotional wisdom counts as much as academic achievement, whether seeing invisible truths matters as much as citing visible facts, finds living expression in the friendship between Luna and Hermione, neither fully understanding the other, but both reluctantly admitting the other's value. You follow Luna into her 4th year at Hogwarts, where a toad-faced woman named Dolores Umbridge has assumed control of defense against the dark arts and begun implementing policies that treat students like problems to be managed rather than minds to be developed. The pink cardigan conceals a cruelty that Luna recognizes immediately, not because she is particularly perceptive about evil, but because she has spent years being underestimated and dismissed, and she knows what dismissal looks like when it wears the costume of pleasant authority. You drift deeper now into the forming of something remarkable. A secret army assembled by students who refuse to accept that learning to defend themselves against darkness constitutes rebellion, though it absolutely constitutes rebellion, which is rather the point when the authorities have abdicated their responsibility to protect the vulnerable. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Luna's name appears on the sign-up sheet for Dumbledore's army with the same quiet determination that characterizes everything she does, her handwriting distinctive even among the scrawled signatures, and you imagine her holding the quill with that particular expression of serene certainty that so unsettles people expecting hesitation. The room of requirement reveals itself to the assembled students as though the castle itself approves of their defiance, providing practice dummies and cushioned floors and enough space for 24 teenagers to practice hexes without accidentally hexing each other more than necessary. Luna approaches the training sessions with an earnestness that surprises those who expected her dreaminess to translate into distraction, her wand movements precise even when her verbal explanations wander through tangents involving creatures of dubious existence and conspiracy theories of uncertain merit. Harry Potter, leading these sessions with the reluctant authority of someone thrust into leadership by circumstance rather than ambition, notices Luna's natural talent for the defensive arts and also notices how the other students have begun treating her differently, not quite with respect, but with something approaching uncertain tolerance, which represents genuine progress. The historical parallel that surfaces is the French resistance during World War II, ordinary citizens gathering in secret to oppose an occupying power that controlled the official institutions, risking everything to maintain the possibility of freedom. And while Umbridge's regime does not quite rise to that level of horror, the parallel holds in its essential spirit of defiance against illegitimate authority. There exists an obscure record in the Ministry of Magic's archives suggesting that secret student organizations at Hogwarts have a longer history than official sources acknowledge, with evidence of similar groups forming during previous authoritarian headmasterships, their existence erased from official histories but preserved in private journals and hidden portraits that occasionally choose to speak. Luna contributes to Dumbledore's army not only her magical talent, but also her capacity for believing in impossible things, which turns out to be precisely the capacity needed when the possible seems to have narrowed down to obedience or punishment. You watch her practice shield charms with Neville Longbottom, two outcasts helping each other become warriors, their friendship growing in the spaces between spells like flowers finding purchase in cracks in stone, a metaphor that Luna would appreciate for its botanical accuracy and Neville would appreciate for its emphasis on botanical subjects. The joke among the DA members becomes that Luna's Patronus, when she finally produces it, will take the form of some creature nobody else has ever seen, which proves incorrect when a silvery hair emerges from her wand. But several members insist they can see additional details that others cannot, which might be Luna's influence spreading or might be the beginning of mass delusion. And honestly, sometimes those two things are difficult to distinguish. Ginny Weasley becomes Luna's closest friend during this period. An unlikely pairing that works precisely because Ginny possesses enough confidence to find Luna's oddity charming rather than threatening, and enough kindness to defend that oddity against those who lack such perspective. The two of them invent games involving the room of requirements accommodating nature, asking it to provide increasingly absurd things just to see whether it will comply, and discovering that the room's limits are surprisingly elastic when the request is made with sufficient sincerity. Umbridge's inquisitorial squad patrols the corridors with the petty authority of hall monitors granted too much power, and Luna floats past them with an expression of such complete indifference that they frequently forget to question her, confused by someone who seems genuinely unbothered by the threat of punishment. The debate among scholars of resistance movements centers on whether effective opposition requires strategic organization or can emerge organically from shared values, and Dumbledore's army offers evidence for the latter position, a group bound not by formal structure but by common commitment to something larger than themselves. You see Luna laughing with genuine joy during DA meetings, perhaps for the first time since her mother's death, experiencing the particular pleasure of belonging to something, of mattering to people who notice when she's absent and welcome her when she returns. Her combat skills improve steadily, her peculiar way of thinking translating into unpredictable dueling tactics that frustrate opponents expecting standard approaches, and you realize that being underestimated has become a tactical advantage she deploys with increasing effectiveness. The Christmas holidays approach with the weight of everything unresolved, Umbridge still prowling, Harry still plagued by visions, the wizarding world still officially denying the return of Voldemort. And Luna observes these tensions with the clear eyes of someone who has known for years that the official version of reality rarely matches the actual version. She gives Harry advice about the connection he feels to Voldemort's mind, framing it in her characteristic terms of invisible influences and hidden connections, and Harry finds himself listening not despite her strangeness, but because of it, recognizing that her willingness to believe in unseen things might help him understand his own impossible experience. The Quibbler publishes interview after interview with Luna's commentary on events that the Daily Prophet dismisses, building an alternative record of truth that will later prove prescient, and Luna takes quiet pride in her father's work, even as she understands that most readers treat it as entertainment rather than journalism. Neville confides in Luna about his parents, about the locked ward at St. Mungo's, and the woman who hands him candy wrappers as though they are precious gifts. And Luna listens with the particular quality of attention that makes people feel truly heard, not just tolerated, but actually received, their words landing somewhere they will be carefully kept. The winter winds howl around Hogwarts as the year approaches its crisis point, and you feel the gathering tension of a storm about to break, of a world about to change in ways that will demand everything from everyone, Luna included. You follow Luna now into the chaos of a night that will test every lesson she has learned, as Harry's vision of Sirius Black tortured in the Department of Mysteries sends a small group of students flying toward London on the backs of creatures that most of them cannot see. The Thestrals carry their riders through darkening skies with the steady determination of beings who understand death better than most, and Luna sits astride her mount with perfect comfort, speaking soothing words to the invisible beast while her companions clutch desperately at what they cannot perceive. This journey represents everything that makes Luna essential to the group. She sees what others cannot, believes what others will not, and offers guidance through landscapes that would otherwise remain impassable. Qualities that seemed like weaknesses in the classroom, but become strengths when the stakes rise. Neville rides beside her with white-knuckled determination, trusting the Thestral he cannot see because he trusts Luna, and this small act of faith touches something deep in her heart that has long ago given up expecting trust from anyone outside her father's kitchen. Harry's desperation drives the group forward with a speed that probably constitutes recklessness. But Luna understands desperate grief and does not judge its urgency, keeping pace without complaint as London materializes below them. The telephone box entrance to the Ministry of Magic accepts their descent with mechanical indifference, lowering them into the heart of wizarding government with visitor badges that identify them by names and purposes that feel absurdly mundane given the circumstances. Honestly, what purpose should Luna have listed rescuing loved ones from snake-faced megalomaniacs? The corridors of the Department of Mysteries twist through geometries that seem designed to confuse, doors opening onto rooms that contain impossible things, and Luna navigates these contradictions with less difficulty than her companions because she has spent her entire life accepting that reality contains more layers than convention acknowledges. The brain room particularly fascinates her, though she has the good sense not to touch the floating brains in their tanks, which is more than some of her companions can claim. And there's a joke about men and their poor impulse control somewhere in here. But perhaps this isn't the moment for gender commentary, given the life-threatening circumstances. You breathe with Luna as the truth becomes horribly clear. Sirius Black is not here. The vision was a trap, and Death Eaters are materializing in the shadowy corridors with expressions that suggest the evening's entertainment is about to become significantly more violent. The historical fact that emerges in this moment of crisis is that the Department of Mysteries has existed since the founding of the Ministry of Magic in 1707, its purpose always shrouded in secrecy and its research always teetering on the edge between breakthrough and catastrophe, much like the situation currently unfolding, though the department's usual catastrophes probably involve fewer masked terrorists. There exists a theory, whispered among ministry employees who have worked the night shift, that the Department of Mysteries contains doors that lead to other worlds entirely, other timelines where history unfolded differently, and that the unspeakables sometimes return from their research subtly changed in ways they themselves cannot identify. Luna's wand rises with instinctive speed as the first curses fly, her training in the room of requirement translating into reflex, and you feel the strange calm that settles over her in combat. Not fearlessness, but rather an acceptance of whatever comes next, grounded in her long-held certainty that death is not an ending to be feared, but a doorway to something beyond mortal understanding. She duels with creativity that confuses her opponents, casting spells and combinations that no textbook recommends, exploiting the gap between what Death Eaters expect and what Luna delivers. The prophecy that Voldemort seeks sits at the center of this violence, a small glass orb containing words that will drive the war's direction, and Luna protects her friends as they flee through room after room with its fragile cargo. The scholarly debate regarding the nature of prophecy, whether it describes fixed destiny or merely probable futures that human choice can alter, becomes suddenly very practical when you are literally running for your life while carrying a prophetic object. Harry leads the group in retreat, or perhaps advance, depending on how one interprets their increasingly desperate movements through the department's impossible architecture. Luna finds herself fighting beside Ginny in the death chamber, where an ancient veil hangs between stone columns and whispers things that only certain people can hear, and Luna hears those whispers with painful clarity, recognizing voices that she has not heard since she was 9 years old. The temptation to approach the veil, to step through and find her mother on the other side, rises in Luna like a tide, and you feel the terrible pull of that desire. The way grief can transform even the most dangerous doorways into irresistible invitations. She resists because there are people here who need her, because her father would never survive losing her too, because the voices from beyond are patient and will wait until she is ready. And this refusal costs her something, a small piece of hope that she must release into the universe without guarantee of return. Bellatrix Lestrange moves through the battle with the savage joy of someone who has found their purpose, and Luna faces her with the understanding that she is dramatically outmatched, but also with the stubborn refusal to show fear that has characterized her entire existence. A curse strikes Luna across the face, spinning her vision into darkness and pain, and she falls beside the stone seats of the Death Chamber's amphitheater with the taste of blood in her mouth and the sound of combat continuing above her. The battle ends, eventually, in ways that Luna will piece together later from fragments, Dumbledore arriving, Order members fighting, Sirius falling through the veil that Luna had just resisted, and she grieves for Harry's loss even through the haze of her own injuries. The healers at St. Mungo's treat Luna's wounds with professional efficiency, muttering about children involved in ministry battles as though anyone had particularly wanted to be involved, and Luna submits to their care with the patience of someone who has survived worse than physical injury. You see her in the hospital bed, still wearing her butterbeer cork necklace because the healers gave up trying to remove it after her patient but firm insistence that it protected her from nargles, and you feel something like pride in her refusal to abandon herself even in these institutional surroundings. The return to Hogwarts brings a different kind of battle. The battle of recovery, of processing, of living with the knowledge that the world has become more dangerous and that the people she cares about are directly in the line of fire. Luna's injuries heal faster than Harry's grief, but she does not measure pain comparatively, offering him comfort without expectation and space without abandonment, understanding that loss takes as long as it takes and no amount of rushing will shorten the journey. The summer term passes in a blur of exams and recovery, and Luna begins preparing for a war that everyone now admits is actually happening, which feels like both vindication and horror. Vindication because the Quibbler has been saying this for years. Horror because being right about coming darkness is not actually better than being wrong about it. You step forward now through the darkening landscape of the wizarding world as Voldemort's return transforms from controversial rumor to undeniable reality, and the forces of darkness begin organizing for open war. Luna's 6th year at Hogwarts arrives wrapped in security measures and fear, the castle feeling less like a school and more like a fortress preparing for siege, and she walks its familiar corridors with new awareness of what might be coming. Harry's secret lessons with Dumbledore create ripples of speculation that Luna observes without pressing for details, trusting that important information will be shared when the moment requires it and content to focus on what she can actually influence, which, admittedly, feels like less than she would prefer. The Slug Club, that peculiar gathering of students deemed interesting by Professor Slughorn, includes Luna more for her entertainment value than her influence, but she attends its events with genuine enjoyment because free food is free food, and the opportunity to observe social dynamics is always educational. She accompanies Harry to Slughorn's Christmas party, wearing robes that sparkle with what might be enchanted fabric or might be actual glitter, and the combination of her sincerity and her unconventional fashion choices creates exactly the sort of memorable impression that Slughorn will dine out on for decades. The historical parallel that surfaces in your mind is the salon culture of 18th century France, where intellectuals and eccentrics gathered in elegant rooms to discuss ideas that would eventually reshape the world, though presumably with fewer discussions of nargles and more discussions of social contracts depending on which salons one frequented. There exists a theory, proposed by magical historians studying the period, that Slughorn's party that year served as more than social gathering, that it functioned as an informal intelligence operation, with Dumbledore's allies quietly identifying which students might be recruited to which cause, though this theory has never been confirmed, and Slughorn himself denies any such intention, while simultaneously suggesting that if such an operation had existed, it would have been brilliantly executed. Luna notices the tension between Harry and Draco Malfoy escalating throughout the year, her peculiar perception picking up on details that others miss, but she lacks the context to understand what she's observing, and so files it away for future consideration along with her other collections of unexplained observations. The romance blooming between Ron and Lavender provides lighter entertainment, and Luna offers Hermione surprisingly practical emotional support during the awkward period when watching one's crush with someone else feels like swallowing glass. Surprisingly practical, because everyone expects Luna's advice to involve magical creatures, which it occasionally does, but not exclusively. Quidditch matches continue despite the looming war, and Luna commentates one memorable game with a stream of consciousness style that drives Professor McGonagall nearly to distraction but delights the crowd with observations about cloud shapes and player fashion choices that have nothing whatsoever to do with the actual game. She wears her lion hat to support Gryffindor with a sincerity that transforms what could be mockable into something almost inspiring. Because when Luna commits to something, she commits completely, and there is a peculiar power in wholehearted ridiculousness that self-conscious coolness can never match. The scholarly debate about authenticity versus performance becomes very practical when observing Luna, who seems incapable of performing anything she doesn't genuinely feel. And this incapacity functions as both limitation and superpower depending on the context. Dumbledore's death at the end of the year lands like a physical blow, and Luna processes the loss alongside everyone else while also providing comfort to others, her experience with grief making her a steady presence in the chaos that follows. The funeral brings the wizarding world together in ways that will soon fracture, and Luna sits with Neville and Ginny and the others who have become family, understanding that the battle ahead will demand everything they have. You see her at the reception afterward, offering Harry condolences that avoid the usual platitudes and land with the specific kindness of someone who has survived similar loss. Not minimizing his pain, but acknowledging that survival is possible, even when it doesn't feel possible. The summer that follows Dumbledore's death brings the Lovegood house under increasing surveillance, as Xenophilius's continued publication of articles supporting Harry Potter and criticizing the ministry makes the family a target for those who prefer citizens silent and compliant. Luna helps her father with the Quibbler, understanding that their work has become genuinely dangerous, but unable to abandon it, without abandoning everything they believe about truth and courage and the duty of those who can see to speak for those who cannot. The Death Eaters come for her on the Hogwarts Express, snatching her from the train like a package to be delivered, and you feel the terror of that moment, the sudden hands, the spinning disorientation of forced apparition. The knowledge that she is being taken to a place where her father's silence will be purchased with her safety. She arrives at Malfoy Manor with bruises forming and terror controlled, because Luna long ago learned that showing fear gives power to those who want to frighten, and she refuses to provide that satisfaction even when the fear is entirely justified. The Malfoy Manor cellar becomes her home for months, a stone prison shared with a wandmaker named Ollivander, and occasionally other prisoners whose stories she collects with the same care she collects everything worth keeping. She offers Ollivander comfort that he never expected from someone so young, her certainty about unseen things translating into certainty about eventual rescue, and this hope keeps the old man alive through weeks that would otherwise crush him. There exists a quirky historical record about Malfoy Manor itself, suggesting that the cellars were built over an ancient site of power that predates the manor by centuries, and that prisoners held there sometimes reported hearing music from nowhere, a detail Luna notices but does not mention, preferring to keep certain observations private. You descend now into the depths of captivity, breathing with Luna as she counts the stones in her cell wall and invents games to keep her mind sharp and holds fast to the conviction that rescue will come because she cannot afford to believe otherwise. The darkness of the Malfoy Manor cellar has a quality that seems designed to swallow hope, but Luna's particular gift has always been seeing light where others see only shadow, and she applies this gift with the dedication of someone performing necessary work. Ollivander's despair provides purpose, as caring for someone more broken than herself keeps Luna anchored to something outside her own fear, and the strange intimacy of shared imprisonment creates a bond between the unlikely companions that will endure long after their rescue. Dean Thomas arrives as a fellow prisoner, bringing news of the outside world and the ongoing war, and Luna welcomes him with the same serene calm that characterized her before captivity, as though being imprisoned in a Death Eater stronghold is merely an interesting change of scenery, rather than a life-threatening crisis. The days blur together in the way days do when there is nothing to mark their passage, and Luna begins telling stories to her fellow prisoners. Stories about creatures that may or may not exist, about adventures that may or may not have happened, about futures that may or may not be possible. And these stories become survival itself, small fires lit against overwhelming darkness. The historical fact that emerges from this experience connects to the tradition of storytelling in concentration camps during the Holocaust, where prisoners maintained humanity through sharing narratives, their words becoming weapons against dehumanization. And while Luna's situation differs in scale and nature, the fundamental truth holds that stories can save lives by saving spirits. There exists a theory among magical researchers studying the psychology of imprisonment that certain locations develop what might be called despair resonance, absorbing the hopelessness of previous prisoners and broadcasting it to current ones. And Luna consciously counters this effect by radiating the opposite frequency with stubborn determination. She teaches Ollivander about nargles and rackspurts during their long hours in the dark, and he teaches her about wand lore in return, and this exchange of impossible beliefs and practical knowledge creates its own small light in the underground blackness. The Malfoys occasionally bring food or make inspections, and Luna observes them with the same detached interest she would apply to any other species, noting the dynamics between parents and son, the way Draco cannot quite meet her eyes, the fractures in the family unity that imprisonment has given her time to identify. She does not hate her captors, because hate requires energy she cannot spare, and also because she has learned that hate rarely helps anyone, least of all the person doing the hating, though she certainly does not forgive them either, filing away the experience for future processing when survival is less immediately urgent. The rescue, when it comes, arrives in the form of Dobby the house elf, whose appearance in the cellar represents improbable hope made manifest, and Luna feels tears she had not permitted herself throughout her captivity suddenly breaking free at the sight of salvation. The escape requires trust and timing and a degree of luck that even Luna finds somewhat excessive, but she follows the plan with the same calm that has characterized her imprisonment, neither panicking nor hesitating when the moment demands action. She grips Ollivander's hand as they disapparate, the familiar crushing sensation of magical transportation feeling almost like freedom, and lands on a beach that smells of salt and possibility, where a cottage called Shell waits to provide sanctuary. Bill and Fleur Weasley offer hospitality that Luna receives with grateful exhaustion, finally permitting herself to feel the terror and despair that she had held at bay for months, finally allowing the controlled exterior to crack just enough to let the accumulated pressure escape. The scholarly debate about resilience, whether it represents genuine internal strength or merely delayed suffering, and whether survivors carry invisible wounds that manifest later in unexpected ways, applies to Luna's recovery without resolving neatly in any direction. She rests and heals and reconnects with the world, learning about everything she missed during her imprisonment, processing the fact that the war has continued without her and will require her participation again when she is ready. Harry visits briefly, looking worse than the last time she saw him and clearly carrying burdens that he cannot share. And Luna offers what she can: presence, understanding, the particular comfort of someone who knows that some experiences cannot be discussed, but need not be carried alone. Neville's resistance at Hogwarts reaches her as rumor and report, stories of the underground army he has built in the Room of Requirement. And Luna feels pride in her friend's courage, even as she wishes she could have been there to help. The Lovegood house has been destroyed, she learns, the cost of Xenophilius's attempted betrayal and subsequent remorse. And Luna grieves the loss of her childhood home, while understanding that her father did what he did to save her, which makes forgiveness possible, if not exactly easy. The final battle approaches with the inevitability of all climaxes, and Luna prepares herself for whatever comes next, understanding that she has already survived things that should have broken her and trusting that survival has equipped her for what remains. She returns to Hogwarts on the night of the battle, entering through the portrait of Ariana Dumbledore in the Hog's Head, rejoining friends who greet her with joy that confirms she has been missed. And this confirmation matters more than she expected it to. The Room of Requirement has transformed into something between barracks and refugee camp, students and resistance fighters preparing for the fight that everyone knows is coming, and Luna takes her place among them with the quiet certainty of someone who has found where she belongs. You follow Luna now through the chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, where spells light the night sky and the castle shakes with the force of magic being deployed on scales that none of its current inhabitants have ever witnessed, and you feel her courage rising to meet the moment despite everything that moment demands. She fights alongside Neville in the early hours, stunning Death Eaters with the same serene expression she wears when discussing Nargles, as though combat is simply another interesting experience to be processed later when time permits. The losses mount through the night. Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, and Luna accepts each grief as it arrives, filing it away in the same internal compartment where she has stored every other loss, understanding that proper mourning must wait until the fighting ends. She helps Harry find Ravenclaw's diadem by suggesting Helena Ravenclaw as a source of information, her unconventional thinking once again proving essential when conventional approaches fail, and this contribution matters even though it will never be recorded in the history books that others will write. The historical fact that wars are typically narrated by their victors and their most visible participants applies painfully to the Battle of Hogwarts, where Luna's contributions will fade into footnotes while louder voices claim the central narratives, which is fine, honestly, because Luna has never been interested in centrality, only in truth. There exists a quiet theory among those who study magical warfare that the Battle of Hogwarts succeeded partly because of the psychological contributions of individuals like Luna, whose calm in crisis transmitted hope to others. And this theory will never be proven because hope cannot be measured, but that doesn't make it any less true. The morning light finds Luna exhausted and alive, standing among survivors who cannot quite believe they have survived, looking at the rubble of her school and understanding that rebuilding will take years but will happen because that's what living people do. They rebuild and rebuild again until the world resembles something worth living in. The joke she makes to Neville about breakfast being late due to unforeseen battle-related complications lands with exactly the right mixture of absurdity and acknowledgement, proving that humor survives even when so much else does not. And this survival matters more than any history book will ever record. The scholarly debate about how societies recover from collective trauma has no easy answers, but Luna's experience suggests that recovery begins with small acts of normalcy, eating, sleeping, making terrible jokes, that gradually accumulate into something resembling ordinary life. You watch the years unfold gently now, the pace of your imagination slowing as the urgency fades and peace settles over the wizarding world like soft snow over scarred landscapes. Luna becomes a magi zoologist, traveling the world in search of the creatures her mother once sought to understand. And some of those creatures turn out to be real, while others remain elusive, and Luna finds equal wonder in discoveries and in mysteries that persist. She marries Rolf Scamander, grandson of Newt, finding in him a kindred spirit who shares her passion for the impossible and who loves her without ever trying to make her less strange. Their twin sons will grow up hearing stories about Nargles and Thestrals and the war that their mother fought, and these stories will shape them in ways that Luna hopes will make the world slightly more interesting. Xenophilius lives out his years surrounded by grandchildren who take the Quibbler seriously, or at least take seriously the love behind it. And Luna visits often, watching the sunset from the rebuilt, rook-shaped house with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has traveled far and returned home. You feel your own breathing slowing now, your body settling deeper into wherever you are resting. As Luna's story fades toward its gentle conclusion, the candles in Shell Cottage flicker lower as the waves whisper against the shore. And somewhere in the distance, an owl calls softly to the emerging stars. Luna walks along a moonlit beach, her bare feet leaving prints that the tide will soon erase. And she thinks about her mother and her friends and all the invisible creatures who have kept her company through the years. The wind carries the scent of salt and possibility, and she breathes deeply, feeling the particular peace that comes from having been fully herself, regardless of what that cost. Sleep approaches now like a gentle tide, washing over the edges of awareness with patient persistence, and you let it come, trusting that the morning will bring new stories and new wonders. Luna turns toward her cottage, toward her family, toward the life she has built from loss and love and stubborn hope. And the last thing you see before the darkness is her smile, strange and serene and absolutely undiminished by everything. She steps inside as the cottage warms around her, the quiet glow of lamplight spreading across shelves lined with shells, sketches, and tiny bottled mysteries collected from years of wandering. Her family sleeps peacefully in the next room, their soft breathing a reminder that the world, despite everything, continues. Luna pauses for a moment, listening to the sea beyond the walls, grateful for every strange path that led her here. She closes the door softly, carries her smile into the dim room, and lets the night fold around her like a familiar cloak. And with that, the story settles into rest.